My name is not important. Let's just say I worked in forestry and land surveying for about 15 years. I was good at my job. I spent most of my time alone, deep in the woods, miles from any road. That was the part I liked. The quiet. The feeling of being the only person for miles around. It never scared me. I knew the woods. I knew the animals, the sounds, the smells. A snapping twig meant a deer. A certain rustle in the undergrowth was a grouse. A huffing sound could be a bear, and you paid attention to that, but you knew what to do. You make noise. You make yourself big. You carry spray. I had seen dozens of black bears, a few grizzlies from a distance. They never wanted anything to do with me. I was just part of the landscape to them. This particular job was in northern Washington. It was a preliminary survey for a proposed gas pipeline. My task was simple. Walk the proposed route, take GPS readings, mark trees with flagging tape, and make notes about the terrain. It was a long-term project. Weeks turned into months. I had a routine. I'd drive my truck as far as I could up an old logging road, then park it. From there, I'd go out on foot. Sometimes I'd be gone all day, hiking 5, maybe 10 miles into the wilderness and back again. It was late October. The days were getting shorter. The air had a cold bite to it. The leaves were mostly down, which made it easier to see through the trees. But it also meant the sun went down behind the mountains that much faster. I was working a section of the route that was particularly remote. The logging road was barely a road anymore. My truck was the only vehicle that had been up it in years, judging by the vegetation growing in the middle. I parked in my usual spot, a small, flat clearing where the road ended. I grabbed my pack, my equipment, and started walking. The first few hours were completely normal. The sun was out. The birds were making noise. A squirrel chattered at me from a hemlock tree. I did my work, took a reading, tied a ribbon, made a note, walked 100 yards, did it again. It was methodical, almost meditative. Around 2 in the afternoon, I noticed the first thing that was off. It was the silence. One moment, the forest was alive with little noises. The next, it was dead quiet. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was like someone flipped a switch. No birds, no squirrels, no wind in the trees, nothing. I've been in the woods when things go quiet before. It usually means a predator is nearby, a cougar maybe, or a bear. So I stopped. I listened. I scanned the trees around me. I looked for any movement, any shape that was out of place. I saw nothing. The silence stretched on. It was heavy, unnatural. I started to feel a prickling on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. Every outdoorsman knows that feeling. 9 times out of 10, it's just your mind playing tricks on you. But you never ignore it. I unholstered my bear spray just to have it in my hand. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, perfectly still. The silence remained absolute. I told myself it was probably a mountain lion stalking a deer. They're quiet. They're sneaky. The other animals would go silent until it passed. That made sense, so I kept working, but I was on edge now. Every shadow seemed to move. Every dark space between the trees looked like a hiding place. I tried to shake it off. I had a job to do. I had a schedule to keep. Then came the smell. It was faint at first. I caught a whiff of it on the breeze. It was foul, like a pile of wet garbage left out in the sun, mixed with the smell of a wet dog, a big, dirty, wet dog, and something else underneath, something coppery like old blood. I thought maybe a bear had made a kill nearby. That would explain the silence and the smell. A bear on a fresh kill is the most dangerous thing you can run into. I stopped again. I sniffed the air, trying to get a direction. The wind was swirling. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. I decided to alter my route slightly, to give whatever was up ahead a wide berth. I moved about 50 yards to the south and continued on. The smell faded. The woods were still silent. I worked for another hour, the unease growing with every step. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky. The light turned golden, and the shadows grew long and distorted. It was time to start heading back to the truck. I turned around and began retracing my steps, following the line of brightly colored flagging tape I'd left behind. That's when I heard it. A single heavy footstep. It was off to my right, maybe 40 yards away, just inside the tree line. It was heavy, too heavy for a deer. It sounded like a man in heavy boots, but it wasn't. I froze. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and weak in the immense silence. No answer. I waited. Then I heard it again. Snap, a thick branch breaking under weight. I raised the can of bear spray, my heart starting to pound in my chest. "Is someone there?" I shouted, trying to sound forceful. "I'm armed." Silence. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. From the trees to my right, something mirrored my movement. A heavy, shuffling step. I stopped. It stopped. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a bear. A bear would have huffed or charged or run away. It wouldn't be doing this. This was calculating. This was a game. I started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps in the woods matched my pace, step for step. I could hear it clearly now. It was staying parallel to me, keeping to the dense cover of the firs. I caught a flash of movement, a dark shape, moving between two massive tree trunks. It was big, taller than a man. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. Bear. It has to be a bear, but it wasn't shaped like a bear. It was too upright, too slender. I started walking even faster, my boots crunching on the dry leaves and pine needles. The thing in the woods sped up, too. It was no longer trying to be quiet. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, snapping branches as it went. The sound was terrifying, the sheer power of it. I told myself not to run. Running triggers a predator's chase instinct. But my body didn't want to listen. Every nerve was screaming at me to flee. I risked a glance to my right. In a small gap in the trees, I saw it clearly for a second. It was standing on two legs. It was covered in dark, shaggy fur. It had broad, powerful shoulders and long arms that hung down past its knees. But the head, that's the part that broke my brain. It was the head of a wolf, a massive canine head with a long snout and pointed ears that stood erect on top. It turned its head and looked right at me. Even from that distance, I could see its eyes. They were yellow, and they were intelligent. There was no animal stupidity in that gaze. There was thought. There was malice. Time seemed to stop. We just looked at each other, the surveyor and the monster. Then it took a step out from behind the tree. It was easily 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its legs were bent at a strange angle, like a dog's hind legs, but it stood upright with an unsettling ease. It opened its mouth, and I saw a flash of long, yellow teeth. A low growl rumbled from its chest. It was a sound that I felt in my bones, a deep, resonant threat that vibrated through the ground. That's what broke the spell. I turned and I ran. I didn't care about instincts or rules. I ran for my life. I abandoned my equipment. My pack went flying. The only thing I held on to was the can of bear spray. Behind me, I heard an explosive sound as it burst from the trees and onto the path. The ground shook with its footfalls. It was unbelievably fast. I could hear its heavy breathing, a series of guttural pants right behind me. The foul smell of rot and wet fur was overwhelming. I didn't dare look back. I just pumped my legs, dodging trees and jumping over fallen logs. The flagging tape I'd so carefully placed was now my lifeline, guiding me back toward the truck, toward safety. I could feel it gaining on me. I could feel its presence, a wave of cold dread just over my shoulder. I risked a look. It was maybe 20 feet behind me, running on two legs with a horrifying loping stride. Its long arms were swinging, its claws digging into the dirt with each step. Its yellow eyes were locked on me. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound of pure terror. I saw the clearing ahead. I saw the familiar shape of my truck. It was still so far away, maybe 100 yards. My lungs were burning. My legs felt like lead. The creature behind me let out a snarl. I knew it was about to catch me. I had one last desperate idea. I spun around, still running backwards, and pressed the trigger on the can of bear spray. A huge orange cloud of pepper extract shot out between us. The creature ran right into it. It let out a roar of pain and fury, a sound that was half wolf, half man, and all nightmare. It stopped, pawing at its face with its huge clawed hands. That gave me the time I needed. I turned and sprinted the last 50 yards to my truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I ripped the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. I hit the lock button a dozen times. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life. As the headlights flashed on, they illuminated the creature. It was standing at the edge of the clearing, shaking its massive head. It looked up, its eyes glowing in the beams. They weren't yellow anymore. They were red with rage and pain. It let out another deafening roar and charged. I threw the truck into reverse, stomping on the gas pedal. The tires spun on the loose dirt, kicking up rocks and dust. The creature was almost at the truck. The tires finally caught, and the truck shot backwards. I cranked the wheel, spinning the truck around to face the road. The creature was right there next to my window. It raised a hand and slammed it against the glass. The window didn't break, but a spider web of cracks appeared. I saw its face inches from mine. The long snout, the black lips, pulled back in a snarl, the rows of dagger-like teeth. I screamed and hit the gas. The truck lurched forward. I felt a heavy impact as it slammed its body against the passenger side door, leaving a massive dent. But I was moving. I floored it, flying down the overgrown logging road at a suicidal speed. Branches scraped against the paint. The truck bounced and bucked over ruts and rocks. I didn't care. I looked in my rear view mirror. It was standing in the middle of the road, watching me go. A huge, dark silhouette against the dying light. Then it turned and melted back into the trees. I didn't slow down until I hit paved road. I drove straight to the nearest town and checked into a motel. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the bed with the lights on, shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those yellow eyes. The next morning, I called my boss. I told him I quit. He asked why. I told him I had a run-in with a bear, a very aggressive, very unusual bear, he didn't believe me. He knew I wasn't the type to get spooked by a bear. I didn't care. I told him to mail me my final check. I left all my survey equipment in those woods. They can have it. I never went back. I moved out of Washington a month later. I took a job in an office. I can't be in the woods anymore. The silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels threatening. The shadows don't feel cool and inviting. They feel like they're hiding something. I still have nightmares. Sometimes I wake up smelling wet dog and rot. My wife says I cry out in my sleep. I've never told her the full story or anyone else who would believe me. They'd say I saw a bear. They'd say my mind was playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw. I saw the intelligence in its eyes. Bears don't play cat and mouse. They don't stalk you for miles. They don't try to open your car door. What I saw was a monster. It was real. I'm sharing this because I know there are other people who work in those remote places, loggers, surveyors, rangers. You need to know what's out there. You need to trust that feeling on the back of your neck. When the woods go silent, it's for a reason, and you need to get out. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Just get out, because you're not at the top of the food chain out there. Not even close. My name is withheld by request. My story starts at my grandfather's cabin. He passed away a few years ago and left the property to my mother. It was a small, rustic place deep in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. No neighbors for miles, no cell service, just a creaky old landline phone. I had spent a lot of summers there as a child. To me, it was a magical place, full of good memories, fishing in the creek with my grandfather, learning the names of the trees, listening to the whippoorwills at night. It always felt safe. It felt like home. My mom had been putting off the inevitable task of cleaning it out. It was too emotional for her. I was between jobs, so I volunteered to go up for a week and handle it. I thought it would be a nice, quiet retreat, a chance to unplug and reminisce. I packed up my car with supplies and drove up on a Monday. The cabin was just as I remembered it. Weathered wood, a stone chimney, a wide front porch with a swing. It was dusty inside and smelled of old books and wood smoke. I spent the first day just airing the place out and getting settled. It was peaceful. The silence was a welcome change from the noise of the city. That night I sat on the porch swing, watching the stars come out. The sky was so clear, you could see the Milky Way. I felt completely at ease. The first strange thing happened that night. I was asleep in the loft, which was my old summer bedroom. I was woken up by a sound from downstairs, a scratching sound. It sounded like it was coming from the front porch. I wasn't alarmed. My first thought was a raccoon. They were always getting into the trash cans when I was a kid. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but the scratching continued, and more insistent now. Then I heard a thump, like something heavy had bumped into the side of the cabin. I sat up. It was probably just a deer, I told myself. I laid back down and eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning I went out onto the porch to have my coffee. That's when I saw the marks. On the thick wooden railing of the porch, there were deep gouges. 3 of them running parallel. They were fresh. You could see the lighter color of the wood underneath. They were also high up, about 4 feet off the porch deck, and they were wide apart. Way too wide for a raccoon or a possum, even a bear. A bear's claws would be closer together. I ran my fingers over the marks. They were deep. It took a lot of force to do that. A little knot of unease started to form in my stomach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a buck, rubbing its antlers on the railing. But the marks looked like claw marks, not scrapes from antlers. I spent the day working inside, sorting through old photos and packing up my grandfather's books. But my mind kept going back to the marks on the porch. I found myself glancing out the windows more often. The woods that had always felt so welcoming now seemed to hold secrets. The shadows between the trees looked deeper, darker. As evening approached, I made sure all the windows were locked. I closed the heavy wooden shutters on the downstairs windows. My grandfather had always said they were for keeping out bears. Suddenly, I was very glad they were there. I made dinner and tried to distract myself by reading one of his old paperbacks by the fireplace. The wind had picked up. It howled around the corners of the cabin. Branches scraped against the roof. Every sound made me jump. Around 10 o'clock, I heard it again. Footsteps on the porch. They weren't the light scuttling of a small animal. They were heavy, deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of something large walking on the wooden planks. I froze, the book falling from my hands. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It was walking the length of the porch back and forth. I could hear the old boards creaking under its weight. I told myself it was a bear. It had to be a bear. I got up slowly and crept to the front door. The door had a small peephole. My hand was shaking as I reached up to slide the metal cover aside. I put my eye to the hole and looked out. I saw nothing. Just the dark, grainy image of the porch railing and the blackness of the night beyond. The footsteps had stopped. Maybe it had gone. Then I heard a sniffing sound. It was right at the door. A loud, wet, snuffling sound, like a big dog sniffing at the crack under the door. I jumped back, a small gasp escaping my lips. I backed away from the door, my eyes wide with terror. I didn't know what to do. The landline was in the kitchen. I could call for help. But who would I call? The nearest police station was 40 minutes away. What would I even tell them? There's a big animal on my porch? They would think I was crazy. The sniffing stopped. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind and the crackling fire. Then came a sound that made my soul turn to ice. A scratch. At the door. A slow, deliberate scrape of something sharp against the wood. It wasn't frantic. It was curious, like it was testing the door. I backed away further until my back hit the wall. I looked around the room for a weapon. The only thing I could see was the heavy iron poker next to the fireplace. I grabbed it, my knuckles white. It felt flimsy and useless. Then, a loud thump against the side of the cabin. It sounded like someone had thrown a boulder at the wall. The whole cabin shook. A picture fell off the mantelpiece and shattered on the hearth. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The sound was followed by silence. A terrible, waiting silence. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, holding the poker out in front of me. My breathing was shallow and fast. I was listening for any sound. I heard it move around to the back of the cabin. There was a window in the kitchen that didn't have a shutter. It was too high up. A small square window above the sink. I heard a scratching sound from that direction. It was trying to get to the window. I had to see. I had to know what it was. Against all reason, I crept into the dark kitchen. The only light came from the dying embers in the fireplace. I moved towards the sink, my feet silent on the linoleum floor. I stood on my toes and peered out the small window. At first, all I saw was darkness. Then a shape blotted out the stars. Something huge was rising up outside the window. A head came into view. It was long and narrow. It was covered in coarse, dark fur. It had pointed ears that twitched, listening. And then it turned. Two eyes, glowing with a faint, sickly yellow light, stared directly into mine. It was a wolf's head. A giant, monstrous wolf's head. But it was attached to a body that stood upright. I saw a glimpse of a massive shoulder, a thick, muscular neck. We were only a few feet apart, separated by a single pane of glass. I saw its nostrils flare as it sniffed the air. I saw the intelligence in those glowing eyes, the cold, predatory cunning. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. We were locked in that gaze for what felt like an eternity. Then it opened its mouth. I didn't hear a sound, but I saw the rows of long, sharp teeth. It seemed to smile. Then it was gone. The shape dropped down below the window, out of sight. I stumbled backwards, collapsing against the kitchen counter. I was hyperventilating. My mind was completely broken. It couldn't process what I had just seen. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. It was something from a nightmare. I heard it at the back door now, pushing against it. The old wood groaned in protest. The lock was a simple deadbolt. My grandfather's rifle. I remembered he kept a hunting rifle in the closet in his bedroom. I scrambled from the kitchen, through the living room, and into the small downstairs bedroom. I fumbled in the dark closet, my hands searching frantically. I found it. A long, heavy rifle. I didn't know if it was loaded. I didn't even know how to check. But holding it made me feel marginally safer. I backed into the corner of the room, the one farthest from the door and the window. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The rifle pointed at the doorway, and I waited. I listened to it circle the cabin for the rest of the night. It was relentless. It tested every door, every window. I heard it pushing against the shutters, making the wood splinter and crack. I heard its claws scraping against the log walls. Sometimes it would make a sound. Not a howl or a growl, a low, guttural whine, a sound of frustration. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. I sat in that corner all night long. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I just listened to the monster outside, trying to find a way in. I watched the sky through the small bedroom window slowly turn from black to gray. Just as the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon, the sound stopped. Complete silence. I didn't trust it. I stayed in that corner, clutching the rifle for another 2 hours, until the sun was fully up and streaming through the window. Only then did I dare to move. My whole body was stiff and sore. I crept through the cabin, looking out each window. I saw nothing. The woods were quiet. I went to the front door and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. I slowly, carefully unlocked the door and opened it a crack. The morning air was cold and clean. I stepped out onto the porch. The railing was shattered in one spot. There were deep claw marks all over the front door. The wooden shutters were splintered and broken. Around the back of the cabin there were huge muddy footprints in the soft earth under the kitchen window. They weren't bear prints. They were like a wolf's, but 5 times bigger. And there were only 2 of them. I didn't pack. I left everything. I grabbed my purse and my car keys, ran to my car and got out of there. I drove until I had cell service, and I called my mom. I was sobbing, hysterical. I tried to tell her what happened. She thought I had just gotten spooked being alone in the cabin. She said I had an overactive imagination. No one believed me. They think I imagined it all. I hired a company to go to the cabin, pack everything up, and put it in storage. I told them to board up the windows and change the locks. The property is for sale now. I will never go back there. The memories I had of that place are gone. They've been replaced by the memory of a yellow-eyed face in the window. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I can still hear it. The sound of claws on wood. The sound of something wanting to get in. I don't know what I saw that night, but it was real. And it's still out there. My name is anonymous. I've been a fisherman my whole life. My dad taught me how to bait a hook before I knew how to tie my shoes. For me, fishing was never about catching fish. It was about the quiet. It was about being out on the water, away from everything. My favorite time to go was at night, especially on a moonless night when the lake was like a sheet of black glass, and the only light came from the stars. There's a certain kind of peace you can only find in a boat, in the middle of a lake, in the middle of the night. I had a spot I liked to go. A remote lake in the upper peninsula of Michigan. It was hard to get to. You had to drive down miles of dirt roads and then carry your boat down a steep path to the water. Most people didn't bother. I rarely ever saw another soul out there. It was my sanctuary. I had a small 12-foot aluminum boat with a little trolling motor, just big enough for me, my gear, and a cooler. This one night in late summer, I headed out there. The weather was perfect. Calm, warm, not a cloud in the sky. I got my boat in the water just as the sun was setting. I motored out to the middle of the lake, cut the engine, and cast my line. The silence was beautiful. The only sounds were the crickets on the shore and the gentle plop of my lure hitting the water. I sat there for hours just enjoying the solitude. I wasn't catching anything, but I didn't care. Around midnight, I was starting to think about packing it in. That's when I heard the first sound that was out of place. It was a splash. It came from the northern shore, the most remote part of the lake, where the forest came right down to the water's edge. It was a big splash. My first thought was a deer. They often came down to the lake to drink at night. I didn't think much of it. I rebaited my hook and cast out again. A few minutes later, I heard another sound. It wasn't a splash this time. It was the sound of something wading into the water. Slow, heavy steps. Splosh, splosh, splosh. It was too rhythmic for a deer. A deer would be more cautious, more skittish. This sounded deliberate, confident, and it sounded heavy. I thought maybe it was a moose. They're common in that area, but it was the wrong time of year for them to be spending so much time in the water. A little bit of curiosity got the better of me. I had a powerful spotlight in my tackle box, the kind that can light up a shoreline from 100 yards away. I grabbed it, stood up in the boat, and pointed it in the direction of the sound. I thumbed the switch. A bright white beam cut through the darkness. I swept the light back and forth across the shoreline. I saw the usual things: rocks, fallen trees, thick walls of ferns and pines. Then the beam landed on it, and my world stopped. It was standing in the water, about up to its knees. It was hunched over, its back to me. It was huge. easily the size of a large man, but thicker, wider. It was covered from head to toe in dark, matted fur that looked black in the harsh glare of the spotlight. My first rational thought was bear. It's a big black bear, but the shape was all wrong. The shoulders were too broad. The waist was too narrow. It had long, muscular arms and legs. As I held the light on it, it slowly straightened up. It turned its head to look at me. And that's when the bear theory evaporated. It wasn't a bear. It had the head of a wolf. A perfectly formed, massive wolf's head set on the powerful man-like shoulders of this creature. It had a long snout filled with teeth that I could see even from that distance. It had pointed ears that were erect and alert, and its eyes, the light from my spotlight reflected off them. They glowed with a terrifying, brilliant green fire. We were probably 70 yards apart, but I felt like it was staring right into my soul. It didn't seem scared of the light. It didn't seem surprised. It just stood there in the water watching me. Its posture was not that of an animal. It was defiant. It was intelligent. It looked angry that I had found it. I was completely frozen. My mind couldn't make sense of what my eyes were seeing. It was a creature from a storybook, a myth, but it was real, and it was right there. Then it took a step towards me, deeper into the water. It raised its head and let out a sound. It started as a low growl, a rumble, that I felt through the hull of the boat. Then it rose in pitch into a full-blown howl, but it wasn't the clean, mournful howl of a wolf. It was guttural, raspy. It had a human quality to it that made my skin crawl. The sound echoed across the lake, bouncing off the trees. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard in my life. It was a declaration, a challenge. When the howl ended, it started moving towards me. It didn't swim. It walked through the water, pushing its way forward with incredible strength. It was moving fast, much faster than a person could wade. The water churned around its powerful legs. That's what snapped me out of my trance. It was coming for me. I dropped the spotlight. It clattered to the bottom of the boat. I scrambled to the back of the boat, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I fumbled for the pull cord on the trolling motor. My mind was screaming, "Start, start. Please, God, start." I pulled the cord. The motor sputtered once, then died. I looked over my shoulder. The creature was closer now, maybe 50 yards away. I could see the details of its face, the rage in its glowing green eyes, the black lips pulled back from its teeth in a permanent snarl. I pulled the cord again, harder this time. The motor coughed and sputtered. It was trying to catch. The creature was closing the distance, 40 yards. I could hear the water splashing as it charged towards me. I gave the cord one last desperate pull with all my strength. The motor roared to life. I didn't hesitate. I jammed the throttle forward to its maximum speed. The little boat lurched, the bow lifting out of the water. I steered away from the monster, heading for the opposite shore where my truck was parked. The boat wasn't fast, but it was moving. I didn't look back, I was too afraid of what I would see. I just kept the boat pointed at the far shore. My hand clamped on the throttle. When I was about halfway across the lake, I finally risked a glance behind me. I couldn't see it. The part of the lake where it had been was just dark water. I scanned the shoreline with my naked eyes, but it was too dark to see anything. It was gone. But I didn't feel safe. I felt like its eyes were still on me. I didn't slow down until the boat ran aground on the muddy bank. I jumped out into the shallow water and dragged the boat as far up onto the shore as I could. I didn't bother with my gear. I left my rods, my tackle box, my cooler. I grabbed my keys and ran up the path to the dirt road where I had parked. I threw myself into my truck, locked the doors, and sped away. I drove with the pedal to the floor, the truck bouncing and sliding on the dirt road. I didn't feel safe until I was back on the highway with street lights and other cars around me. I sold my boat the next week. I gave away all my fishing gear. I haven't been back to that lake. I haven't been back to any lake. I can't be near the water at night anymore. I can't be in the quiet woods anymore. The peace I used to find in those places is gone. It's been replaced by a deep, gnawing fear. I've told a couple of my close friends about it. They try to be supportive, but I can see the disbelief in their eyes. They think I saw a bear and my mind filled in the blanks. They tell me I was tired, it was dark. But I know what I saw. I'm a hunter. I've seen hundreds of bears. A bear does not have a wolf's head. A bear does not stand 7 feet tall and walk through the water on 2 legs. A bear does not howl with the voice of a demon. What I saw that night was wrong. It was something that shouldn't exist in our world, but it does. And it lives in the dark, quiet places we think are safe. I'm not trying to convince anyone. I'm just telling you what happened. Be careful out there. Be very careful. The story I want to tell happened when I was 17. It was the summer after I got my driver's license and my first real job. I had a paper route, but it wasn't your typical suburban route, tossing papers onto lawns from a bicycle. This was in rural Wisconsin. The route covered a huge area of farmland and woods, all connected by long, unlit gravel roads. My job was to deliver the morning paper, which meant I had to be on the road by 4 a.m. At that time of day, I was the only person awake for miles around. It was just me, my beat-up old sedan, and the darkness. At first, it was kind of spooky. The way the trees would form a tunnel over the road, or the way the fog would settle in the low-lying fields. But after a few weeks, I got used to it. It became my routine. I'd have my music playing low. The window cracked open to let in the cool morning air. I knew every turn, every pothole, every driveway on that route. I actually started to enjoy the solitude. The world was asleep, and I had it all to myself. The biggest excitement I usually had was seeing deer. They were everywhere. I'd see dozens of them every morning, their eyes reflecting in my headlights as they grazed by the side of the road. I got good at spotting them and slowing down in time. This particular morning was no different from any other. It was a clear night in August. No moon. I was about halfway through my route on a long, straight stretch of gravel road. On my left was a dense patch of woods. On my right was a massive cornfield. The corn was high, at least 8 feet tall. It formed a solid wall of green. My headlights cut a path through the darkness ahead of me. That's when I saw movement. Up ahead on the right side of the road at the edge of the cornfield. My immediate thought was deer. I took my foot off the gas and let the car coast, my hand ready on the high beam switch. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a deer. It was standing up on 2 legs. My next thought was that it was a person, maybe someone whose car broke down, but what would someone be doing out here in the middle of nowhere at 4 a.m? I slowed the car down even more, rolling to a near stop about 100 feet away. I flicked on my high beams. The figure was bathed in bright light, and my blood turned to ice. It was not a person. It was impossibly tall and thin, almost skeletal. It was covered in what looked like shaggy dark gray fur. Its arms were long, too long. They hung down almost to its knees. Its legs were bent backwards like a dog's. It was standing there, half turned away from me, looking out over the cornfield. As my high beams hit it, it slowly turned its head to look at my car. The head was long and narrow. It had a snout, a long canine snout. Its ears were pointed and sat high on its head. And its eyes, in the bright glare of my headlights, they glowed. Not a bright reflection like a deer or a cat. A soft, dull, internal red, like the embers of a dying fire. I was paralyzed. My hands were locked on the steering wheel. My foot was frozen on the brake pedal. My brain just stopped working. It couldn't categorize what it was seeing. It was a werewolf. That was the only word that came to mind. A real-life, honest-to-God werewolf, standing on the side of a gravel road in Wisconsin. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me. Its head was slightly tilted as if it was curious. There was no feeling of peace or wonder. There was only a primal, gut-wrenching terror, the kind of fear that bypasses your brain and sinks straight into your bones. This was a predator, and I was its prey. It took a step, a slow, deliberate step off the grassy shoulder and onto the gravel of the road. It was in my path, blocking my way. That single movement broke the spell. My survival instinct kicked in. I didn't think, I just acted. I slammed the gear shift into reverse. The car's engine screamed as I stomped on the gas pedal. The tires spun on the loose gravel, the car fishtailing wildly. As the car started to move backwards, the creature reacted. It dropped. In a single fluid motion, it went from standing on two legs to crouching on all fours. And then it ran. It charged straight at my car. I have never seen anything move that fast. It wasn't running like a dog or a wolf. It was an unnatural loping gallop. Its long limbs ate up the distance between us with terrifying speed. I was still trying to get the car under control, still backing up. I cranked the wheel, trying to turn the car around. The creature was almost on me. I could see its red eyes getting closer and closer in my rear view mirror. I finally got the car turned around. I shifted into drive and floored it. The back end of the car slid out, and for a terrifying second, I thought I was going to spin out into the ditch. But the tires caught, and the car shot forward. I looked in my rear view mirror. The creature was right behind me. It was keeping pace with the car. I was doing 40, then 50 miles an hour on a road where you shouldn't go more than 30. And it was right there, just off my bumper. I could see its head clearly in the red glow of my tail lights. Its mouth was open, its tongue lolling out. It looked like it was enjoying the chase. I screamed. I just kept screaming. I pushed the accelerator to the floor. The old car rattled and shook, 60 miles an hour. For a few more seconds it stayed with me. This towering, monstrous thing, running on all fours right behind my car. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. It veered sharply to the right and disappeared into the wall of corn. I saw the corn stalks shake and part as it crashed through them. And then nothing. I didn't slow down. I drove the rest of my route in a state of pure, blind panic. I ran red lights in the small town at the end of my route. I didn't stop until I was in my own driveway, with the garage door closed and the sun starting to rise. I sat in my car for a long time, shaking and crying. I quit the job that day. I called my boss and told him I wasn't coming in ever again. I told my parents I'd hit a big deer, and it had scared me so badly that I couldn't do the job anymore. They were disappointed, but they accepted it. I never told them the truth. How could I? For months after that, I was terrified of the dark. I couldn't drive on country roads at night. Every time I passed a cornfield, my heart would start to race. The image of that thing was burned into my memory, the unnatural way it stood, the way it ran, those dull red eyes. It's been over 10 years since that night. I'm a grown man now. I have a family of my own. But I've never forgotten. I know what I saw was real. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't a bear with mange. It was something else. Something that hunts the dark roads when the rest of the world is asleep. I'm telling this story because I need to get it out. I need someone else to know that these things are real. Maybe someone else has seen it too. Maybe I'm not the only one. When you're driving at night on those lonely roads and you see something on the shoulder up ahead, don't slow down, don't stop, just speed up and pray it doesn't decide to chase you. Name withheld. Before all this happened, I was what you'd call a creature of habit. My life ran on a schedule that was, for the most part, dictated by the sun and the needs of my job. I worked in residential construction, framing houses. It was hard work, physical work, but it was honest, and it paid the bills. It also meant I was usually up before the dawn and dead tired by the time dinner was over. My house was about 5 miles outside of a small town in the foothills of the Appalachians. It wasn't a big house. Just a small 2-bedroom place my grandfather had built on a couple of acres of land. It was surrounded by woods on 3 sides, with the 4th side opening up to the gravel road that led back to the main county highway. I loved it there. The quiet was something you could feel, a physical presence. At night, the only lights were from my own windows and the stars, which were so bright they felt like you could reach out and touch them. I knew the sounds of those woods like I knew my own name. The hoot of the barred owls, the yips and howls of the coyote packs running the ridges, the constant humming chorus of insects in the summer. It was my sanctuary. The routine that led to that night was one I'd followed for years. Every Tuesday after work, I'd drive over to my parents' house for dinner. It was a standing appointment. My mom would cook. My dad and I would talk about work or sports. And I'd usually be on my way home by 9 or 9:30. Their house was about 40 minutes away, deeper into the country than mine. The drive involved about 10 miles of paved highway, and then another 5 or 6 miles of winding, poorly maintained county roads. The last of these roads, the one that eventually connected back to my own gravel lane, was called Old Hemlock Road. It was a road that time had forgotten. It was barely wide enough for 1 truck, let alone 2 cars passing. The asphalt had given way to gravel and packed dirt decades ago. In the summer, the trees on either side grew so thick they formed a canopy, a green tunnel that made it feel like twilight even in the middle of the day. At night, it was just black, a solid, oppressive blackness that your headlights could only push back a few dozen feet at a time. I'd driven that road thousands of times. In every season, in every kind of weather. I knew every pothole, every sharp curve, every place where deer were likely to jump out in front of you. It never scared me. It was just part of the drive. It was home. This particular Tuesday was in late September. The air was starting to get that crisp edge to it, the first real hint of autumn. The leaves were just beginning to turn and the sun was setting earlier every day. I left my parents' house around 9:15, same as always. I remember my mom telling me to be careful, the way she always did. I remember my dad clapping me on the shoulder and telling me he'd see me at the job site the next morning. It was all so normal, so routine. There was no sense of foreboding. No little voice in the back of my head warning me that this night would be different. The drive started off just like any other. I had the radio on, listening to some classic rock station. The windows of my old Ford Ranger were down, letting in the cool night air. The smell of wood smoke and damp earth filled the cab. I passed the usual landmarks. The old abandoned church, the rusted-out tractor sitting in Miller's field, the little wooden bridge over the creek. I turned off the paved road and onto the gravel that marked the beginning of the truly isolated part of my journey. The truck's tires crunched over the loose stones. The world outside my windows dissolved into a moving wall of dark trees. My headlights cut a lonely path through the darkness. This was the stretch I secretly liked the best. It felt like I was the only person left in the world. Just me, my truck, and the night. I was about 3 miles down Old Hemlock Road when the first thing happened. It was subtle. So subtle that at first I didn't even consciously register it. It was a change in the sound. The constant thrumming symphony of the crickets and tree frogs. It just stopped. One moment it was there, a wall of sound that was so familiar, I never even noticed it. The next, it was gone. The silence that replaced it was profound. It was a dead, heavy silence. It felt unnatural. It was the kind of quiet that makes the hair on your arms stand up. I turned the radio down without even thinking about it. I strained my ears, listening. There was nothing, no insects, no rustle of leaves from some small animal in the underbrush, not even the wind. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. I've spent my entire life in the woods. I've been hunting with my dad since I was old enough to hold a rifle. I know that predators can make the woods go quiet. A bobcat, a coyote pack, even a bear moving through can silence the smaller creatures. So that's what I told myself. Probably just a coyote on the prowl, I muttered to myself, trying to fill the unnerving silence with the sound of my own voice. But it didn't feel right. This was different. This silence had a weight to it. It felt watchful. I kept driving, maybe a little faster than before. My hands were a bit tighter on the steering wheel. My eyes were scanning the tree line back and forth from one side of the road to the other. The feeling of being the only person in the world was no longer comforting. Now it felt isolating, dangerous. Then came the smell. It hit me all at once. It was thick and foul, and it poured in through my open windows like a physical thing. My first thought was a dead deer. It happens all the time. Someone hits one, and it stumbles off into the woods to die. The smell is awful, a heavy, rotten sweet scent of decay. But this wasn't that. There was a note of rot in it for sure. but it was mixed with something else, something musky and alive. The closest I can come to describing it is wet dog, like a big dog that's been rolling in something dead and then got soaked in swamp water. It was a rank, greasy animal smell, and it was strong, overpowering. It made my eyes water and the back of my throat clench. I instinctively rolled up my windows, but the smell was already in the truck. It clung to the air, thick and suffocating. "What in the world is that?" I said out loud. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A dead bear? Maybe, but the smell was too fresh, too animal. Could it be a wild hog? We had them in the area, and they could get big and smelly, but I'd never smelled one that bad before. I slowed the truck down, my headlights sweeping across the dense woods on either side of the road. I was looking for a carcass, a shape, anything that could explain the silence and the stench. I saw nothing but trees and shadows. The feeling of being watched intensified. It was a prickly, crawling sensation on the back of my neck. I felt exposed, even inside the steel cab of my truck. I had the distinct and terrifying feeling that whatever was making that smell was close, and it knew I was there. I pressed a little harder on the gas. My heart was starting to beat faster now, a steady, heavy thumping against my ribs. The rational part of my brain was still trying to convince me it was nothing. A coincidence, a dead animal and a passing coyote. But my gut, that deep, primal instinct we all have, was screaming at me. It was telling me that something was very, very wrong. I came around a sharp bend in the road, one I knew well. It opened up into a short straightaway, maybe 100 yards long, before curving back into the woods, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shape. It was standing on the right side of the road, right at the edge of the woods. It was tall and dark, a silhouette against the slightly less black background of the trees. My initial thought was that it was a person, maybe a hunter walking home late, or someone whose car had broken down. I took my foot off the gas, letting the truck coast forward. I squinted, trying to make out more details. "Hey, you need some help?" I was about to call out, but the words died in my throat. As my headlights got closer, the shape resolved into something that my brain simply could not process. It was not a person, and it was not a bear. It was standing on two legs, but they weren't human legs. They were bent backwards like the hind legs of a dog. They were thick with muscle and covered in what looked like dark, matted fur. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing towered over my truck. I tried to estimate its height later, and the only number that seemed right was 7.5, maybe 8 feet. Its arms were long, too long for its body, and they hung down past its knees. They were powerfully built, like a gorilla's, ending in what looked like large clawed hands. But the head was the worst part. It was the head of a wolf, or a very large, monstrous dog. It had a long snout, filled with teeth that I could see even from a distance, because its lips were pulled back in a silent snarl. Its ears were pointed and stood erect on the top of its head, swiveling slightly, tracking the sound of my approaching truck. I was frozen. My hands were locked on the steering wheel. My foot was hovering somewhere between the gas and the brake. My mind was just a loop of 3 words over and over again. "That's not real. That's not real. That's not real." It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few seconds. Me in my truck rolling slowly forward. It on the side of the road, standing perfectly still watching me. Then it moved. It turned its head and its eyes caught the beam of my headlights. They glowed, a bright burning amber yellow, like a cat's eyes, but there was no mistaking the intelligence behind them. This was not some dumb animal. It was looking at me, it was seeing me, it was assessing me. And in that moment, I felt a kind of fear I have never known before or since. It was a pure primal terror that bypassed all rational thought. It was the fear of a prey animal that has just realized it is in the presence of a predator. My paralysis broke. My foot slammed down on the brake pedal. The truck's tires skidded on the gravel, and the vehicle lurched to a stop not more than 50 feet from the creature. That was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. My sudden stop seemed to act as a trigger. The creature lowered its upper body slightly, hunching its massive shoulders. It took a step forward, out of the shadows of the tree line, and into the full glare of my high beams. I could see it clearly now. Its fur was a dark, brindled brown and black. It was patchy and coarse-looking. Its chest was broad and deep, and I could see the ripple of powerful muscles under its skin. The smell was suddenly 10 times stronger, even through the glass of my windows. It was the smell of the thing. It let out a sound. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a bark. It was a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the floor of my truck. It was a sound of pure menace, a warning that I had trespassed somewhere I didn't belong. I had 2 thoughts in that split second. The first was to put the truck in reverse and get out of there as fast as I could. The second was to floor it and try to run the thing over. I don't know why, but I chose the second option. Maybe it was the fight or flight response kicking in. Maybe I thought it was the only way. I shifted the truck into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The engine roared, and the tires spun on the loose gravel for a second before they caught. The truck lunged forward. The creature reacted with a speed that was impossible. It didn't jump out of the way. It didn't try to run. It met me head on. In 2 massive strides, it covered the distance between us. It leaped, not up, but forward. Its long arms came up, and its hands, claws extended, slammed down onto the hood of my truck. The sound was deafening. A screech of metal on metal, a deep, percussive boom as its weight hit the front of the vehicle. The truck rocked violently, and the windshield cracked from the force of the impact. I was thrown forward, my chest hitting the steering wheel hard. For a second, the wind was knocked out of me. I looked up through the spider web of cracks in the glass, and it was right there. Its face was inches from mine, separated only by a thin layer of safety glass. I could see the individual whiskers on its long snout. I could see the yellow stains on its enormous canine teeth. I could see the cold, tonight hateful intelligence in those glowing amber eyes. It opened its mouth and roared. The sound was like nothing I've ever heard. It was a combination of a wolf's howl and a lion's roar, but deeper, louder, and filled with a rage that shook the very frame of the truck. The cab was filled with a sound so loud it felt like my eardrums were going to burst. And the smell of its hot, rotten breath washed over the truck. It wasn't just standing on the hood, it was trying to get to me, its claws, thick and black, like obsidian hooks, were digging into the metal of the hood, peeling it back like a tin can. One of its massive hands came up and slammed against the driver's side window. The glass didn't break, but it shuddered in its frame. I was screaming. I don't remember starting, but I was just making a high, thin sound of pure terror. My survival instinct finally took over. My foot was still on the gas, the back tires still spinning uselessly against the creature's weight on the front end. I threw the gear shift into reverse. The transmission groaned in protest, but it caught. I floored the accelerator. The truck shot backwards, tires screaming. The creature was caught by surprise. Its weight shifted, and for a second it struggled to keep its balance on the bucking hood. Then it was thrown off, tumbling onto the gravel road in a flurry of dark limbs. I didn't wait to see if it was hurt. I didn't care. I slammed the shifter back into drive, cranked the wheel hard to the left, and stomped on the gas. The truck swerved around the dark shape that was already scrambling to its feet. As I passed it, it lunged for the side of the truck. I heard a horrible scraping sound all along the passenger side, the sound of claws on steel. The truck fishtailed, and for a terrifying second I thought I was going to lose control and go into the ditch. But I held on. I corrected the skid and straightened out, my foot never leaving the floor. I risked a glance in my rearview mirror. It was there, in the middle of the road, illuminated by my red tail lights. It was standing on its hind legs again, watching me go. And then it did something that chills me to the bone to this day. It started to run. It dropped down onto all fours, and it ran after me, and it was fast. Unbelievably fast. It wasn't running like a dog or a wolf. It was loping, but with the powerful strides of something much larger. It covered ground at a terrifying pace. In my mirror, I could see it gaining on me. The two glowing points of its eyes were getting closer and closer. My old truck was tough, but it wasn't fast. I had the pedal to the floor, and the engine was screaming. The speedometer needle was vibrating somewhere around 50 miles an hour, which was dangerously fast for that road. But it wasn't fast enough. The creature was pacing me, running in the darkness just to the side of the truck. I could hear its heavy, rhythmic breathing over the sound of my own engine. I could hear its claws clicking on the gravel. I swerved the truck towards it, trying to hit it, trying to force it back. It just moved with the truck, effortlessly, staying just out of reach. It was toying with me. It was hunting me. I saw a dark shape leap from the side of the road and heard another loud bang on the side of the truck bed. It was trying to get in, trying to climb into the back of my Ranger. I was crying now. Hot tears were streaming down my face, but my eyes were glued to the road ahead, to the mirror, to the darkness on my right. I was praying, bargaining with a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Please, God, please just get me out of this. Please. The road ahead started to curve. I knew this section. It was a series of sharp, winding turns. I wouldn't be able to keep up my speed. It knew it too. As I slowed for the first curve, it made its move. It surged forward, and for a moment it was running right beside my driver's side door. I could have reached out and touched it. I turned my head and looked right at it. Its head was level with my window. It turned and looked right back at me. Those amber eyes burned with a terrifying, malevolent intelligence. Its lips were peeled back from its teeth in a horrifying semblance of a grin. Then it lunged at the window. Its shoulder hit the glass with a sickening thud. The whole truck shook. I screamed and swerved away from it. Tires sliding on the gravel, the rear end of the truck swinging out towards the ditch. I overcorrected, and for a moment, the world was a blur of spinning trees and darkness. The truck went into a full spin. I remember the sound of screeching tires, the smell of burning rubber, and the terrifying feeling of being completely out of control. The truck slammed backwards into the embankment on the other side of the road. The impact was jarring, throwing me against my seatbelt. The engine stalled, and everything was silent again. The headlights were still on, pointing at a crazy angle into the woods. The radio was playing softly, some forgotten song that sounded alien and wrong in the sudden, deafening quiet. My breath was coming in ragged, painful gasps. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. I was covered in a cold sweat. I sat there, frozen, for what felt like an hour. It was probably 10 seconds. My eyes were wide, scanning the darkness outside my windows. Where was it? Where did it go? I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to turn it. The engine sputtered, then caught with a roar. The sound was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I didn't bother trying to turn around. I just put the truck in drive and stomped on the gas, plowing through the ditch and back onto the road, facing the wrong way, but I didn't care. I was moving. I drove the rest of the way down Old Hemlock Road in reverse, my neck craned around, my eyes scanning the rear view mirror and the road behind me. I didn't see it again. The moment my tires hit the pavement of the county highway, it was like I had crossed into another world. A world with streetlights and other cars. A world where monsters didn't exist. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The thought of being in my isolated little house, surrounded by those same dark woods, was more than I could bear. I drove back to my parents' house. I must have been a sight. I pulled into their driveway at nearly 70 miles an hour, skidding to a stop just inches from their garage door. I didn't even turn the truck off. I just burst out of the cab and sprinted for the front door, pounding on it with both fists and screaming for my dad. He came to the door in his pajamas, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. It turned to shock when he saw me. My face was pale and tear-streaked. I was shaking from head to toe. I probably looked like I'd seen a ghost. I practically fell inside, babbling something incoherent about a monster, an animal, something on the road. My mom came running, and they sat me down at the kitchen table. My mom wrapped a blanket around my shoulders while my dad tried to get me to explain what had happened. I tried. I really did. I told them about the silence, the smell, the thing on the side of the road, the eyes, the way it attacked my truck. They listened patiently, but I could see the look they exchanged over my head. It was a look of concern, but not of belief. They thought I'd hit a deer and was in shock, or that I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and had a vivid nightmare. My dad went outside with a flashlight to look at my truck. He was gone for a long time. When he came back in, his face was pale. "Well," he said slowly, "you definitely hit something." He told me the hood was crumpled and had long, deep gouges in it. He said the windshield was shattered. And he said there were scratches, deep ones, running the entire length of the passenger side of the truck, from the front fender all the way to the tailgate. "What kind of deer does that, Dad?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't have an answer. He just shook his head and said we'd talk about it in the morning. He told me I should get some sleep. Sleep was impossible. They put me in my old childhood bedroom. I locked the door and pushed a dresser in front of it. I checked the window lock a dozen times. I spent the entire night sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, staring at the door, listening to every creak and groan of the house. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those glowing amber eyes, that mouth full of teeth. The sun has never been as welcome as it was the next morning. In the light of day, things seemed slightly less terrifying. Slightly. My parents still thought I'd had some kind of waking nightmare, brought on by hitting a big animal, maybe a bear. They were worried about me about a possible concussion. They wouldn't accept my story. I couldn't blame them. It sounded insane. If someone had told me the same story the day before, I would have thought they were crazy or lying. My dad helped me get the truck to a local body shop. The mechanic, a guy I'd known my whole life, just whistled when he saw it. "Looks like you tangled with a bear, son," he said. "Something like that," I mumbled. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. I couldn't face that look of disbelief again. That was the beginning of the change. I never drove Old Hemlock Road again, not once, not even in the middle of a sunny day. If I have to go to my parents' house, I take the long way around, an extra 20 minutes on the main highways. I sold the truck. I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. Every dent, every scratch was a reminder of that night. I bought a small sedan, something for driving on pavement. I moved. About 6 months after the incident, I sold my grandfather's house. I couldn't live there anymore. The woods I had once loved had become a place of terror for me. Every night when the sun went down, the fear would creep back in. Every snap of a twig outside my window, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I live in town now, in a small apartment on the 3rd floor. I have neighbors on all sides. There are streetlights outside my window all night long. It's noisy and crowded, and I hate it. But I feel safer. The experience broke something inside of me. My sense of safety in the world is gone. The comfortable reality I lived in was shattered that night on that lonely road. I now know that the world is not the safe, understandable place I thought it was. There are things out there, in the dark places, that we don't understand. Things that are ancient and powerful and predatory. I have nightmares. Not as often as I used to, but they still come. I'll be back in my truck on that road. The woods are silent. The smell fills the cab, and I see those 2 glowing amber eyes in my rearview mirror getting closer and closer. I always wake up yelling, drenched in a cold sweat. I've lost friends over it. I tried to tell my best friend, Mark, about it once. We were having a few beers, and I thought maybe he would understand. He's a hunter like me. He spends a lot of time in the woods. I told him the whole story just as I've told it here. He just stared at me. Then he laughed. He thought it was a joke. When he realized I was serious, he got quiet and uncomfortable. He told me I should probably talk to someone, a professional. He suggested maybe I was overworked, stressed out. We don't talk much anymore. How can you be close to someone when you can't share the single most important and terrifying event of your life with them. So I learned to keep it to myself, and it's a heavy secret to carry alone. It's isolating. It makes you feel like you're the only one. But then a few years ago, I found the internet. I started searching late at night when I couldn't sleep. I used search terms I was almost embarrassed to type. Dog-headed monster, upright walking wolf, creature on back road. And I found them, story after story, from all over the country, all over the world. People describing the same thing I saw. The same impossible creature. The same details, the height, the backward bent legs, the long arms, the canine head, the glowing eyes, the unnatural speed and strength, the overwhelming sense of dread and malevolent intelligence. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. Reading these other accounts didn't make the fear go away, but it did something else. It validated my experience. It let me know that what I saw was real. It has a name. Some people call it a dogman. Some call it a werewolf. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that it's out there. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a flesh and blood animal that science hasn't discovered yet, or if it's something else. Something supernatural, something from another dimension. I don't pretend to have the answers. All I have is my story, my truth. I am sharing this now for two reasons. The first is for me, to get it all out in one place for people who might actually listen without judgment, to unburden myself, even just a little bit. The second reason is for you, for anyone who lives in a rural area, who drives on lonely back roads late at night, who camps or hikes or hunts in the deep woods. I want to warn you, trust your instincts. That feeling you get sometimes, that little prickle on the back of your neck that tells you something is wrong, don't ignore it. Don't rationalize it away. If you're in the woods and everything suddenly goes silent, leave. Get in your car. Get back to civilization and don't stop. If you smell something that makes you sick to your stomach, a smell of rot and wet fur, turn around. Go back the way you came. And if you ever see a pair of glowing amber eyes watching you from the darkness of the side of the road, do not stop. Do not hesitate. Just drive. Drive as fast as you can and don't look back. Because what I saw that night was not a bear. It was not a man in a costume. Bears don't stand 8 feet tall on canine legs. They don't have long wolf-like snouts. They don't move with that kind of intelligent, predatory speed. What I saw was a monster, and it was real. It's been almost 10 years since that night. I'm a different person now. I'm more cautious, more aware. I pay attention to the shadows. I don't take my safety for granted anymore. Sometimes, on a quiet night, I'll be sitting in my apartment and I'll hear a dog bark somewhere in the distance. And for a split second, my heart will freeze in my chest. I'll be right back in that truck, on that dark road, with the sound of claws scraping against metal and a monstrous face staring at me through the shattered glass. I survived. I don't know why. Maybe it was just toying with me and decided I wasn't worth the effort. Maybe I just got lucky. But I know one thing for sure. I am never, ever going back into those woods again. Some places belong to the darkness, and some things are better left undisturbed. I learned that lesson the hard way on Old Hemlock Road. And it's a lesson I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I often think back to the moments just before the encounter, The comfortable routine, the familiar road, the music on the radio. It feels like a lifetime ago, like a memory from someone else's life. That man, the one who felt safe in the world, who loved the isolation of the deep woods, he died that night. He was replaced by the person I am today, a man who checks his locks 3 times before going to bed, who avoids looking into the darkness for too long, who understands that the map of the world we are given is incomplete. There are blank spaces filled with things that defy our understanding. The physical scars on the truck are long gone, melted down and recycled into something new. But the scars on my mind, on my soul, they remain. They are a constant reminder of the thin veil between our world and another, far more ancient and dangerous one, and a reminder of how easily that veil can be torn away. My family has lived in this hollow for 150 years. That's not an exaggeration. The original deed, signed and sealed, is framed in my father's house. It describes the land by creeks and rock formations and the old sycamore that was struck by lightning back in the 70s but still stands, split and gray, by the lower field. We are part of this land, and the land is part of us. I grew up running these hills. I know the game trails better than the paved roads in town. I can tell you where the deer will bed down in the winter and where the turkeys will roost in the spring. I know the sound of a branch breaking under the weight of a squirrel versus the sound of one breaking under the hoof of a whitetail. These woods are in my blood. They were my playground, my church, my sanctuary. Were. That's the word that sticks in my throat. Before all this happened, I was 26 years old. I was working for a local construction crew, framing houses. It was hard work, honest work. It paid the bills. But my real life, my true life, happened here, on our 400 acres of Appalachian hillside. I lived in a small cabin my grandfather and I built when I was in high school. It's about a quarter mile up the hollow from my parents' main house, tucked back against the slope where an old logging road peters out into nothing. It's simple: a main room with a wood stove, a small kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, a wide front porch where I'd sit in the evenings and listen to the world settle down for the night. The sounds were a symphony I knew by heart. The whip-poor wills starting their calls as the sun went down. The coyotes yipping and howling on the far ridge. The low hum of insects. The rustle of leaves from some small creature making its way through the underbrush. It was a language of peace, of normalcy. I never felt afraid out here. Not once. Why would I? I was a part of it. I was competent. I carried a rifle during hunting season and a sidearm most other times, more out of habit than necessity. I knew the dangers that were real. Copperheads in the woodpile. A stray black bear. More nuisance than threat. The occasional meth head looking for a place to hide out, though that was rare this far back. I knew what was real and what was not. Ghost stories, local legends, things that go bump in the night. That was all just talk. Fun to tell around a campfire, but not something a grown man with his feet on the ground actually believed. My grandfather used to tell stories about strange things his father had seen, but he always told them with a little smile, a twinkle in his eye. They were just stories. I was a man of logic, of what I could see and touch and prove. The routine that day was no different than any other. It was late October. The air was crisp, and the leaves were at their peak, a riot of red and gold and orange that set the hills on fire. I got home from work, showered off the sawdust and sweat, and made myself a simple dinner. As dusk started to settle, I decided to take a walk. There was a fence line on the western edge of our property that I'd been meaning to check. It ran along the top of a steep ridge, and winter storms had a habit of bringing trees down on it. I figured I'd walk the line, see if any sections needed mending before the real cold set in. I pulled on my boots, grabbed a heavy flashlight, even though it was still light out, and slipped my pistol into its holster on my belt. Again, just habit. I whistled for my dog, Blue. Blue was a blue tick hound, about 5 years old, a good dog. Not brave exactly, but loud. He'd bay at anything that moved, from a field mouse to a freight train. He was my early warning system. He came trotting out from under the porch, tail wagging, ready for an adventure. We set off up the old logging road. The light was beautiful. It came through the trees in long golden shafts, illuminating the dust motes and falling leaves. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying wood, the rich, clean scent of autumn. Everything was exactly as it should be. We walked for maybe 15 minutes, climbing steadily. The logging road became less distinct, more of a trail. Blue was out in front, nose to the ground, his tail going like a metronome. He'd dart off into the brush, then reappear a moment later, checking to make sure I was still coming. We reached the top of the ridge where the fence line started. It was an old barbed wire fence, sagging in places, rusted but still functional enough to mark the boundary. I started my inspection, walking slowly, my eyes scanning the wire for breaks. It was quiet up here, quieter than down in the hollow. The sounds of the creek in the road didn't reach this high. All I could hear was the whisper of the wind in the treetops and the crunch of my own boots on the dry leaves. And that's when it happened. The first thing. It wasn't a sound. It was the lack of one. One moment the woods were alive with the gentle ambient noise of a forest at dusk. The wind, the chirping of the last few birds settling in for the night. The scuttling of unseen things in the leaf litter. The next moment, silence. It was absolute. A heavy pressing silence that felt like a weight on my eardrums. The kind of silence that makes you stop breathing just to listen to it. Even the wind seemed to have died. I froze, and my hand went to the grip of my pistol. Not because I was scared, not yet, but because my instincts, honed by a lifetime in these woods, screamed that something was wrong. This was not normal. Animals don't just go silent for no reason. A predator will do it, a hawk overhead, a bobcat on the prowl. But for everything to stop at once, every bird, every squirrel, every insect, that was different. That meant the predator was big. I looked over at Blue. He was frozen too. His body was rigid, his head low to the ground, the fur along his spine standing straight up. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound I had never heard him make before. It wasn't his usual loud, excited baying. This was a sound of genuine fear. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. His head was swiveling back and forth, his nostrils flaring as he tested the air. I slowly scanned the trees around us. The light was fading fast now, the shadows growing long and deep. The woods were becoming a wall of dark trunks and tangled branches. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't smell anything out of the ordinary. But the feeling was undeniable. We were being watched. It was a physical sensation, like a pressure on the back of my neck. The kind of feeling you get when you're in a crowded room and you know someone is staring at you. Except we were on top of a remote ridge, miles from the nearest neighbor. My first thought was a bear, a big one maybe, one that wasn't used to people. But a bear would have made some noise. It would have huffed or snapped a twig, and the woods wouldn't have gone this quiet for a bear. My next thought was another person, a poacher maybe. That was a more unsettling thought. A bear is predictable. A person is not. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and weak in the oppressive silence. "Anyone there?" No answer, just that heavy listening silence. Blue let out a low whine, pressing against my leg. He was trembling. "Easy, boy," I whispered, resting a hand on his head. His fear was contagious, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, straining my ears for any sound. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, trying to pierce the growing darkness. Nothing. I started to feel foolish. Maybe it was just a deer that spooked us. Maybe I was letting my imagination get the better of me. But the silence remained. Unbroken. Unnatural. "All right," I said to the dog, more for my own benefit than his. "Let's go home." I decided to abandon the fence inspection. The sun was almost gone, and I had no desire to be up here after dark, feeling like this. I turned to head back down the trail, and then I smelled it. It came on the air, a faint, foul odor that hadn't been there a moment before. It was thick, heavy, musky. It smelled like a wet dog, but 10 times stronger. Like something had been rolling in garbage and mud and death for a week. It was a rotten, greasy smell that coated the back of my throat and made my stomach lurch. I've smelled dead animals before. I've smelled bears and their dens. This was not that. This was something uniquely, primally disgusting. Blue smelled it too. He coughed, a dry hacking sound, and backed away, pressing so hard against my legs I nearly stumbled. The smell was coming from somewhere off to our left, deeper in the woods, paralleling the trail we were on. My mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. The silence. The feeling of being watched. Now this smell. None of it made sense. No animal I knew of could explain all three. I clicked on my flashlight. The powerful beam cut a clean white circle through the gloom. I swept it back and forth through the trees from where the smell was coming. The light caught nothing but tree trunks and undergrowth, dark, empty woods. But the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, and it was focused. It was coming from the same direction as the smell. I started walking, not running. I didn't want to provoke whatever was out there. I just walked deliberately, trying to project a calm I did not feel. I kept the flashlight beam sweeping the woods to my left. Blue stayed glued to my side, whimpering quietly. We walked like that for maybe 50 yards. The silence was still absolute. The only sound was the crunch of my boots and the panicked panting of my dog. Then I heard it. A twig snap. It was loud in the silence. Definitive. It came from the woods to our left, maybe 30 or 40 yards in. I stopped dead. I swung the flashlight beam to the spot. Nothing, just trees. But I knew what I heard. It wasn't a small animal, it was a heavy sound, like a man stepping on a dry branch. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking this time. "I have a gun. I'm not afraid to use it." My words were swallowed by the woods. Then another sound, a deep, resonant thump, followed by another thump, thump. It was the sound of something heavy walking, something on 2 feet, and it was moving parallel to us, keeping pace with us in the darkness. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a bear. A bear walks on 4 feet. The rhythm is different. This was bipedal. The cadence was unmistakably that of a 2-legged creature. My mind flashed to the stories, the old tales my grandfather told. I had always dismissed them, laughed at them. I wasn't laughing now. I started walking faster. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I tried to keep the flashlight beam on the area where the sounds were coming from, but it was difficult to do while moving over the uneven ground. Thump, thump, thump. It was keeping pace effortlessly. The smell was getting stronger. It was overwhelming now, a wave of filth that made me want to gag. I could hear it breathing. It was a low, guttural sound. A wet, raspy inhale and exhale, like an old man with fluid in his lungs, but deeper, more powerful. It was closer now, much closer. Maybe only 20 yards away, just inside the tree line, cloaked by the darkness. I couldn't bring myself to stop and shine the light on it. I was too afraid of what I would see. All I wanted was to get back to the cabin, back to the light, back to safety. The logging road was just ahead, another 100 yards or so. I risked a glance into the woods, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a clear view, just a shape, a silhouette against the slightly less black background of the deep woods. It was tall. Impossibly tall. I'm 6 feet tall. This thing, it towered over the rhododendron bushes that were easily 7 feet high. It had to be 8, maybe 9 feet tall. It was standing perfectly still, just a dark, hulking shape in the shadows, and it was watching me. I saw the briefest glint of light, a reflection, 2 points of light high up on the silhouette. Eyes. My flashlight beam wasn't on it, but it caught some ambient light from the beam's corona. They seemed to glow with their own faint internal luminescence, a sickly yellow-orange, like the eyes of a wolf or a coyote caught in headlights. But these were not the eyes of a coyote. They were too high off the ground, and they were too far apart. I stopped walking. I couldn't help it. My feet were rooted to the spot. My brain was trying to process what my eyes were seeing, and it was failing. It was like a computer trying to run a program it wasn't designed for. The shape was all wrong. It was built like a man. Broad shoulders, a thick torso, 2 arms, 2 legs. But it was not a man. The proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down almost to its knees. The legs seemed backward, jointed like a dog's. And the head. Even in the darkness, I could make out the shape of the head. It was long, a long snout. And on top, silhouetted against the last vestiges of twilight in the sky, were 2 pointed ears. My breath hitched in my chest. Blue was going insane beside me. He was barking and snarling, a frantic, terrified sound. He was trying to be brave, trying to protect me. But he was also trying to climb up my leg to get away. The thing in the woods took a step. It moved out of the deeper shadows and into a small clearing. My flashlight beam, which had been pointing down the path, now caught the edge of it. I saw it clearly for maybe 2 seconds, and those 2 seconds will be burned into my memory until the day I die. It was covered in coarse, dark fur, matted and black, like an old stray dog. Its body was a horrifying combination of man and beast. The chest and shoulders were massively muscled, like a bodybuilder's, but covered in that filthy hair. The legs were bent at a strange angle, like a canine's hind legs, but it was standing upright on them. Its feet were long and clawed. The long arms ended in hands with fingers and a thumb, but they were grotesque, with yellowed thick claws instead of fingernails. And the head, God, the head. It was the head of a wolf, or a huge, monstrous dog. A long graying muzzle pulled back in a silent snarl to reveal yellow-stained fangs. The lips were black and leathery. But the eyes were the worst part. They weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent. They were full of a terrifying, malevolent intelligence. They were looking right at me, sizing me up. There was no confusion in them, no animal curiosity. There was just hate. It locked eyes with me, and in that moment I understood what it was to be prey. Every instinct in my body, every fiber of my being, screamed at me to run. I broke, I turned, and I ran. I didn't think, I just ran. I sprinted down that logging road, not daring to look back. I could hear Blue scrambling behind me, yelping in terror. Behind us, the woods exploded. There was a sound, a roar. It wasn't the roar of a bear or the howl of a wolf. It was something in between, a deep, guttural, wet sound that tore through the night and vibrated in my chest. It was a sound of pure, unrestrained rage. Then came the crashing. It was coming after us. It was moving through the woods with incredible speed. I could hear it breaking branches, smashing through undergrowth as if it wasn't even there. The heavy two-footed footfalls were right behind me, impossibly fast. I've been a runner my whole life. I ran track in high school. I was fast. This thing was faster. I could hear its breathing now, that wet, rasping sound, right over my shoulder. I could smell that god-awful stench, thick and suffocating. It felt like it was right on top of me. I risked a glance back. It was a mistake. It was on the trail now, not in the woods. It was gaining on me with huge, loping strides. Its long arms were pumping. Its head was low. It was running on those backward jointed legs in a way that was both fluid and horrifyingly unnatural. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, two burning coals fixed on me. I screamed. I don't think I've ever screamed like that before. It was a raw, primal sound of absolute terror. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. The cabin was just ahead. I could see the faint yellow light of the porch light through the trees. 100 yards. 50. 30. I could hear it right behind me. I could feel the ground shake with its footfalls. I expected to feel its claws in my back at any second. I hit the small clearing in front of my cabin at a dead sprint. Blue was a blue streak ahead of me, already on the porch, scratching at the door. I vaulted up the 3 steps of the porch in a single leap. My hand fumbled for the doorknob. For a terrifying second, my sweaty palm slipped. Then I got it. I twisted the knob, threw the door open, and shoved Blue inside. I dove in after him, sprawling onto the wooden floor. I slammed the door shut just as a massive weight hit it from the outside. Boom! The whole cabin shook. The wood of the door groaned, splintering around the frame. I scrambled back, crab walking away from the door, my eyes wide with terror. I fumbled for the deadbolt and shot it home. Boom! Another impact, even harder this time. The door bowed inward. A long vertical crack appeared in the thick oak. I could hear it on the porch. Snarling. A low, continuous guttural sound of frustration and rage. Then a scratching sound. Long, deep gouges being dragged down the wood of the door. I crawled to the wall where my shotgun was mounted. I pulled the 12 gauge down, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the action. I chambered a round of buckshot. The shuck-shuck sound was deafening in the small cabin. "Get back," I screamed at the door. "Get the hell away from my house." The snarling stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then I heard it walk across the porch. The heavy footfalls made the floorboards creak and groan under its weight. It was walking to the window. I held my breath. Blue was whimpering under the kitchen table, a small, pathetic sound. I saw a shadow fall across the window, a huge shape blocking the porch light. It was looking in. I couldn't see it clearly through the glass and the screen, but I could see the silhouette of that monstrous head, the pointed ears, the long snout. It was just standing there, watching me. I raised the shotgun, the stock pressed hard against my shoulder. I centered the bead on the dark shape in the window. My finger was on the trigger. My whole body was trembling. We stayed like that for what felt like a lifetime. A standoff, me in my cabin, it on my porch. 2 feet of air and a pane of glass between us. The intelligence in its posture was terrifying. It wasn't acting like a wild animal. A bear would have been raging, trying to break its way in. This thing, it was considering, it was thinking. Then it did something that chilled me to the bone. It raised a hand, a huge, clawed hand, and it rested it gently on the window pane. I saw the long, dark fingers, the thick yellow claws. It didn't push, it didn't tap, it just held its hand there. A gesture that was almost contemplative. And then it let out a low sound. Not a growl, more of a huff, a sound of disgust or dismissal. It turned its head and looked back out into the darkness of the hollow. Then it dropped its hand, turned, and walked to the edge of the porch. I heard it step off the porch onto the ground. I heard 2 heavy footfalls, and then silence. It was gone. I didn't move. I stood there, shotgun raised, aimed at the empty window for a long, long time. I don't know how long. Minutes, an hour. My muscles were locked up. My mind was a blank slate of pure, undiluted terror. Eventually, the shaking started to subside. I slowly lowered the shotgun. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, facing the door, the shotgun across my lap. Every light in the cabin was on. I didn't close my eyes. I just sat there, listening. Blue never came out from under the table. The sun eventually came up. The first rays of light, filtering through the windows, were the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I did not feel safe. I don't think I will ever truly feel safe again. But the terror receded with the darkness, leaving behind a hollow, trembling exhaustion. When it was fully light, I forced myself to go outside. I had to know. I had to see the proof. I had to convince myself I hadn't lost my mind. I opened the door carefully. The front of my cabin was a wreck. The door had 4 long, deep gouges running from top to bottom. They were a good half-inch deep in the solid oak. The wood around the doorknob was splintered and cracked from the impacts. On the porch, by the window, there was a handprint. A large, muddy handprint on the glass. It was shaped like a human hand, but it was massive. and at the tip of each finger mark was a small, sharp scratch in the glass from its claws. And then there were the tracks. Leading up to the porch and away from it in the soft dirt of the yard were footprints. They were huge, maybe 16 or 17 inches long. They were shaped like a dog's or a wolf's paw, but they were the tracks of a bipedal creature. The heel was more pronounced, like a human's. They were the most terrifying, impossible things I had ever seen. I followed them. They walked away from the cabin, down the trail, and then veered off into the woods, heading up the steep hillside. The stride was enormous, 8 or 9 feet between each step. I saw where it had crashed through the undergrowth during the chase. It was like a bulldozer had gone through there. Saplings were snapped in half. Thick rhododendron bushes were flattened. This was not a bear. This was not a man in a suit. This was something else. I went back to the cabin and called my dad. My voice was hoarse, shaky. I just told him he needed to come up. Something had happened. He was there in 10 minutes, his old pickup truck rattling up the road. He's a calm, practical man. A man who has lived in these woods his whole life, just like me. He's seen it all. Or so I thought. He got out of the truck, took one look at my face, and his expression hardened. "What happened, son? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't form the words. I just pointed at the door, at the tracks. He walked over and looked at the damage. He ran his fingers over the deep gouges. He knelt down and studied the footprints in the dirt. He was silent for a long time. "Big bear," he said finally, not looking at me. "Gotta be a big one, mad about something." "Dad," I said, my voice pleading, "that's not a bear track. Look at it, it was walking on 2 legs. He stood up and looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I didn't expect. It wasn't disbelief. It was a kind of deliberate refusal to see. A wall coming down. "You were spooked," he said, his voice flat. "It was dark. Your mind played tricks on you. It was a bear. We'll call the game warden, have him set a trap." "It wasn't a bear." I was almost yelling now. "I saw it, Dad. It had a head like a dog. It was 9 feet tall. It chased me." He just shook his head slowly. He put a hand on my shoulder, but it felt heavy, dismissive. "Go inside, get some sleep. You're not thinking straight." And that was it. He refused to talk about it again. He helped me brace the door, but he never acknowledged the tracks again. He never looked me in the eye when I tried to bring it up. He just changed the subject. I was alone with it. That was the beginning of the end of my life as I knew it. The next few weeks were a living hell. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing, intelligent eyes. I heard that guttural roar. I felt the ground shake as it chased me. I moved back into my parents' house. I couldn't stay in the cabin. It no longer felt like a home. It felt like a trap. A flimsy wooden box in the middle of a monster's territory. My dad never said a word about it. My mom just thought I was having some kind of breakdown. She tried to get me to see a doctor. I stopped going into the woods. The place that had been my sanctuary was now a source of constant, low-grade terror. I couldn't even look at the tree line without my heart starting to race. The sounds of the night, the whip-poor wills and the coyotes, no longer brought me peace. They just reminded me of the silence that came before the monster. Blue was never the same dog. He refused to go outside after dark. He spent most of his time under the porch, trembling. If he heard a strange noise, he would whine and press himself into a corner. He had been broken. I became obsessed. I spent hours online on my phone searching for anything that could explain what I saw. I typed in every combination of words I could think of. Tall, hairy creature, dog-head man body, Appalachian monster. And then I found it, the term Dogman. I found stories, hundreds of them, from all over the country, all over the world. People describing the same thing, the same impossible creature, the same unnatural silence, the same foul smell, the same terrifying, intelligent eyes. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the only one. That realization didn't bring me comfort. It brought me a new kind of fear, a deeper fear. Because if these things were real and they were all over the place, then the world was not the safe, understandable place I had always believed it to be. The woods were not ours. We were just visitors. And sometimes we overstayed our welcome. I sold my hunting rifles. I couldn't imagine walking through those woods again, looking for a deer, knowing what was really out there, what could be hunting me. My friends from work tried to get me to go out, to a bar, to a game. I always said no. I couldn't be around people. Their laughter and their normal everyday problems felt like they were from another planet. How could they be worried about bills or football when there were 9-foot-tall monsters walking the earth? I felt completely and utterly alone. The one person I thought would believe me, my own father, had shut me down. He had chosen to believe in a simple, comfortable lie rather than a terrifying, complicated truth. I think, in a way, he knew. I think maybe his father, my grandfather, had told him the stories not as a joke, but as a warning, and he had chosen to forget. It's been 3 years since that night. I still live with my parents. I still work construction. From the outside, my life probably looks normal, but it's not. I am a different person. I am a haunted man. I have floodlights installed all around the house now. Big, powerful ones that turn the yard into an artificial daylight at the flip of a switch. I check the locks on the doors and windows 3 or 4 times before I go to bed. I never go out after dark. Ever. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear things. A faint, heavy footstep just at the edge of hearing. A strange, low howl carried on the wind from the far ridge. I tell myself it's my imagination, paranoia, but I don't believe it. I know what I saw. I am not trying to convince anyone. I know how it sounds. It sounds insane. If I hadn't lived it, I wouldn't believe it either. I am just telling my story because I have to. It's a weight I have carried alone for too long. These woods are old. There are things in them that we don't understand, things that have been here long before us and will be here long after we are gone. We think we are the masters of this world. We think we have mapped and cataloged and explained everything. We are wrong. There are still dark places on the map, and the darkest places are not on some distant continent. They are right here in our own backyards, just beyond the reach of the porch light. So if you are ever out in the woods and the world suddenly goes quiet, if you feel the hair on the back of your neck stand up, if you smell something foul on the wind, do not try to be brave. Do not try to investigate. Just leave. Run and pray it doesn't decide to follow you home, because I'm telling you, from the bottom of my shattered soul, it might. And if it does, Your life will never ever be the same. You will be like me, a prisoner of the light, forever looking over your shoulder, forever listening for a footstep in the dark, forever remembering the moment you looked into the eyes of the impossible and it looked back